Good evening to you all. Thank you very much for the invitation, Mr. Schulz, and for your wonderful words, and all the other participants, and for the hearty and friendly reception my wife and me have received here. You know, I was the State Attorney of Israel and afterwards Justice of the Supreme Court, and I never had routine cases. I mean, it was always a series of adventures and special occasions, and I don't complain about that. But I think there was no case like the Eichmann case where actually not a day passes without me being reminded of that in this or that connection. I mean, there are so many aspects of that. The historical sense, the emotional, the legal sense, and of course we can't touch all that. But I'm sure also you have read a lot about that case. I would just like to mention just a few points which are always in my special memory and are not generally known. Well, of course, the first moment when Eichmann was brought to Israel, and Prime Minister Ben-Gurion said in Parliament that Eichmann has been caught and will stand trial, that had an electrifying effect all over the country, and certainly something that all of us remember. Then 2 days after Eichmann was brought to Israel, the Minister of Justice, Pinchas Rosen, he called me. I was then the Deputy State Attorney of Israel, and he said, would you be prepared to be the legal advisor of the police bureau that are entrusted with the investigation in the Eichmann trial? Of course, I gladly accepted that. And then actually, for 2 years, I was involved in that trial. A whole prison was vacated for that, and Eichmann was kept there. There were about 30, 40 police officers in charge, and I had my office there. I also was the only connection that Eichmann had with the outside world until his lawyers came from Germany, where they were appointed by his family, and of course the Israel government guaranteed for that he could have any lawyer that he asked for. I at first didn't meet him. I let him know that if he had any technical problems or any special problems that he wanted to discuss, he could come to me. But I also let him know that I was not prepared to talk to him at that stage about the alleged offenses that he committed, because then I would have to be a witness, and I knew I would be one of the prosecutors in the trial. So at first I didn't meet him, but I very often asked, what was your first meeting with him? So I'll never forget that moment. I was sitting in my office on that day, and I was reading the autobiography of Rudolf Höss, the commander of Auschwitz, who was later, in 1948, he was hanged by the Polish government 12 years before Eichmann was caught. But before he was executed, he wrote his biographical notes. And on that day, I read that he described how they had many days where they had to kill 1,000 Jewish children a day. And he described how the children used sometimes to kneel down and beg for their lives. And he wrote, when I and my colleagues had to push the children into the gas chambers, my knees were getting a bit wobbly. But then he added, but I always felt afterwards ashamed of this weakness of mine after I talked to Obersturmbannführer Adolf Eichmann, because Eichmann explained to me that it's especially the children that have to be killed first. He said, because where is the logic that you kill a generation of older people and you leave alive a generation of possible avengers who can afterwards create that race again? Well, maybe there's some kind of silly, incredible logic in that. But 10 minutes after I read that, a policeman came in and said, Adolf Eichmann wants to see you. So I want to tell you, when I heard his steps outside, and he was sitting away from me a yard after I just read that about the children, it was difficult to keep a poker face. Another thing, of course, the evidence. We had hundreds of documents of him and killing 300,000 people here, 700,000 people here, and so on. But for me, the most traumatic moments were sometimes an attempt that was made in every country to save one particular person, one particular Jewish family, one particular person. And so my orders were the police officers, everyone had a different country and a different topic, and they, in the evening they brought the letters, the documents that were important to me, and I had to decide what would be relevant or not. So when there was such an attempt to apply to Eichmann for one particular person, a particular family, they brought this to me. But all these were in chronological order, and therefore it took a few days, sometimes, usually, until I got the reply of Eichmann. So I had dreams at night that sometimes one person or one family or one particular person, and the reasons were tremendous. The person from France, the policeman from France, he brought me a telegram from a German officer, a German general, the commander of Paris. He wrote to Eichmann that there was a Professor Weiss, an expert on radar, and it was very important for the German army to examine him in connection with the experiments made by German scientists. And therefore he insists that this Jew should not be, he and his wife should not be deported. Well, and here it was certain that Eichmann would agree in the middle of the war, a general of the German army, one Jew, expert on radar. Well, Eichmann insisted that this man should be sent away, should be sent to be deported. And he wrote to this general after a few days, I found out that the German army has already taken the patents of this Jew, therefore I see no reason even for one more day to postpone the deportation of that person. The head of the fascist department, the fascist party in Holland, he wrote to Eichmann, there are 12 Jews who are members of that, loyal members of that party, and it will be demoralizing if they are sent away. They also might do intelligence work inside the Jewish community that might help you, he wrote. Again, I thought here, Eichmann would agree. The answer, they should all be deported. If you say it will be demoralizing this week, let's wait 2 or 3 weeks. By then, everything will be all right. And then, one thing which is also hard to forget, the Italian consul of Lithuania wrote to Eichmann. There is a Jewish woman from Italy, and her parents lived in Lithuania, and she was there and she was caught, and they now want to send her away. This woman is the widow of a high Italian officer in the Italian army who fell. And he was incredibly courageous and efficient. And all Italy speaks about him. So the Italian authorities demand that this woman should be permitted to return to Italy. Again, Italy, the ally of Germany. One Jewish person, the widow of a high officer, who all Italy is speaking about him. Well, Eichmann, after a few days, the answer, out of the question. And so I just want to remind you, this person, this Frenchman, you know, the radar man, his name was Weiss. About 2 days afterwards, I also questioned all the witnesses from there. So I handed in these documents. 2 days later, my secretary came to me and said, there's a young woman outside wants to see you. Who said, Alisa Weiss, I don't know her. Anyway, he came in and said, you know, I'm the daughter of this Professor Weiss. I was a baby when they took my parents away. My parents apparently saw that and sent me to neighbors. The neighbors kept me and sent me to America. And now I'm there, and I saw that you had it in these documents about my parents. Now, not only don't I know my parents, I haven't even got a picture of what they looked like. Can you give me some advice how to at least get a picture? Well, I mean, these are moments that are incredibly difficult to forget. Another thing, I was very often asked, did he ever show any regret? You know, in this trial, he said that when he was asked, Eichmann said that this was one of the worst crimes ever committed in history. So I was asked at the time of the trial and later by journalists, by professors, and by experts and politicians, do you think that he meant that seriously? From the point of view of the punishment, that might have been of importance. So I said, no, I'm sure that this was mere lip service towards the outside in order to help himself in this trial. So I was asked, why do you say that? So I said, well, I could imagine that even a man like that, after the end of the war in 1945, in 1961, when the trial took place, 16 years had passed, his eyes could be opened. He could have been persuaded that this was really a terrible crime. Also, he is, as an accused, every doubt goes in his favor. I wouldn't say that that's impossible, but here we had proof that in 1956, when he was in the Argentine already, he was visited by a Dutch fascist journalist, Sassen, and that man questioned him. And there he described to him how wonderful it was to see the death trains from Holland to Auschwitz. And then this Dutchman asked him, but look, Mr. Eichmann, do you feel sorry sometimes for what you have done? He said, yes, I feel sorry for one thing, that I wasn't hard enough, that I wasn't tough enough, that I didn't fight these damn interventionists enough. And now you see the result, the creation of the state of Israel and the re-emergence of that state there. So I said, if he said that in 1956, 11 years after the war, and now 5 years later, when he is fighting for his life, he suddenly speaks of the gravest crime in history, I think I'm justified not to believe at all in a statement like that. I mean, there are so many moments, you know, so many cruel things, but you know, there are these certain moments, you know, we had many cruel witnesses, many witnesses who spoke about cruel things. But there was, you know, one case, I think the only person in the world, a young boy who was already inside a gas chamber with the doors closed, who managed to tell the story. How come? He described how there were 200 children who were put together into a gas chamber, and the doors were closed. It was absolutely dark. And he described how the children used to sing and started to sing to give themselves courage. And then when nothing happened at first, they started to shout and to cry. And then the door opened. We had other evidence about that as well. A train had arrived in Auschwitz with potatoes, and there were not enough SS men to unload it. So the SS commander had the glorious idea, why not use some of the children to unload help unload the train before they were killed. So they took out the first 20 next to the door. He was one of those. They shut the door. The other 180 were killed right away. And the others were also killed, but he had committed some, they said, had committed some negligence, so he was sent to be flogged by an SS man who took a liking to him and kept. Anyway, after that, the judges had to make a break of 15 minutes. They were dazed too, and I also went into my room, and then suddenly the young defense counsel of Eichmann came into my room and burst also into a real weeping attack. I mean, these are specific moments. And one more thing, you saw that the person that I examined, he came from Hungary. Hungary was the place where we had the largest amount of witnesses, because usually Eichmann sat in Berlin, pulled the strings. But when the Germans, you know, Hungary was on the side of the Germans, but their leader, Admiral Horthy, wanted to make a separate peace, and Hitler tried to prevent that. And then the German army was sent into Hungary. So, therefore, this was of particular importance. Hitler and met Horthy at the border of Hungary, tried to see to it that Hungary continued on the side of the Germans. Horthy at first was hesitant, then he agreed, made some conditions. One condition was that the Germans should agree that 8,700 Jews from Budapest should be permitted to go to a neutral country. Hitler agreed, not out of humanitarian reasons, but he wanted the 500,000 Jews who were still in Hungary to be deported to Auschwitz, and he wanted Hungary on his side. And how do we know all this? Because the Germans were very cooperative, the German government. We had all the documents from all the ministries, also the foreign ministry, and we found there was a telegram from the German ambassador to Budapest, von Wesenmayer to Ribbentrop, the foreign minister, and there he described Hitler's agreement about the 8,700 families who could go to a neutral country. And then Wesenmeyer added, I have, however, to inform you that the local representative of the SS, Obersturmbannführer Adolf Eichmann, was very upset when he heard about the arrangement between the Führer Hitler and Horthy, because he thinks these 8,000 families that might be important biological material, and they might from these neutral countries even come to Palestine and help to create that race again. And therefore Eichmann has given instructions to force now the deportation of the Jews from Budapest at such a speed that until the visas can be arranged for that country, for these neutral countries, that no 8,000 Jews shall remain in Budapest. Now, that was, of course, a particularly important document because it really showed that Eichmann was not just a minor person. Even, I mean, Hannah Arendt was mentioned here. She described Eichmann sometimes as someone who just really was not the highest person not carrying out orders. Here we showed that even when there was a decision of the Führer himself, that he tried to avoid, to prevent that. Just one more item, I don't want to exceed my time. When we speak about Hungary, one thing Himmler did do, he forced Eichmann to go to Hungary himself, usually set in Berlin, but here he forced him to go there in order to prevent a mass escape or a mass uprising of Jews there, like what happened to the Warsaw Ghetto a year before that. So one of the first things Eichmann did, he was very proud of that. He described that to us. He said that when the first Jews were sent to Auschwitz from Hungary, before they were put into the gas chambers, they were forced to write postcards to their friends and families. And that was dictated by Eichmann. They had to write, we had a beautiful place called Waldsee, lovely excursions in the neighborhood, not a lot of work, but not a lot of room. So please come as quickly as possible in order to find the rooms that are still available here. Eichmann even added to us, I even added, bring good shoes with you for the excursions so that the German army can afterwards get the shoes of these people who were put into the gas chambers. Now, when I questioned the witnesses about Hungary, the day before the end of the Hungarian case, I heard there was a Jewish person in Israel who had such a postcard, and he was still alive. I asked him to come immediately to Jerusalem. He came at 11 at night. Usually I examined all the witnesses very carefully, but here, when this man came, I never had more than 3 hours sleep, so I asked him, just translate this postcard from Hungarian into Hebrew, which he did. And then I said, what happened to your family? Tell me tomorrow morning when I call you as a witness. So I heard the story for the first time. He described first the postcard. And then I said, what happened to your family? He said, well, he described the selection. He said, he said, my wife, when the SS man said, go to the left. I had a little daughter who was 2.5 years old. He said, go to the left. Then he was asked, what was your profession? He said, I was an engineer in the army. He said, all right, to the right. I still wanted to use him. And said, what happened? Who else was there? I had a son, 13 years old. He said, well, the SS man said, I have to consult my commander. It took a minute or two, and then he came back and he said, all right, run after your mother. You could see in the eyes of that witness that he was back there. Then he said, I thought maybe my son maybe he will have difficulty in finding my wife because there were already hundreds of people in between. So I looked, my wife was swallowed up in the crowd, couldn't see her anymore. My son was swallowed up, I couldn't see him anymore. But my little daughter, 2.5 years old, she had a red coat, and that little red dot getting smaller and smaller, this is how my family disappeared from my life. Now, my daughter was exactly 2.5 years old, and I had bought her a little red coat just 2 weeks before that. And the day before that evidence, my wife had taken a picture of me with this little girl with the red coat. So when the witness said that, it cut off my throat completely. I suddenly I suddenly couldn't utter a sound. The witness recovered, waited for the next question. The judges gave me a sign to continue. The television was on me. It took a few minutes until I managed to get under control again. But I can tell you that until today, I can be in a basketball stadium, I can be in a restaurant, I can be in the street. I suddenly feel my heart beating, and I turn around and I see a little boy or a little girl in a red coat. I mean, there are many things that are very, very difficult. I just want to finish with what I see. You know, sometimes I ask the result of the case. You know, before the case started, many teachers in Israel told me that many of our young people didn't want to hear about the Holocaust. They were a little bit ashamed. A young Israeli can understand that you can be hurt fighting, that you can be killed fighting, that you can lose a battle, that he can understand. But how hundreds and thousands, millions of people can be let themselves be slaughtered without uprising, that somehow they cannot possibly understand. Now, that was not the main purpose of the prosecution, but we at any rate tried to show our young people there was no reason for that. And we showed the almost scientific way. I told you about the postcards about Eichmann, but Eichmann's asked to send. But the almost scientific way in which people, whether they were Russian commissars, or whether they were gypsies, or whether they were Jews or others, how they were misled until the last minute, and how defense was, they were weakened and so on, and how resistance was impossible. And then, when the people like in the Warsaw Ghetto, when they knew death was waiting for them, the incredible courage in which they fought until the last man in order to really have to show resistance, and were killed hundreds of thousands of them, dozens of thousands of them. And therefore there was no reason to be ashamed but to be proud. And therefore, after the case was over, there was a terrific development. Our young people wanted to visit the death camps. They wanted to know about literature in Europe, about Jewish literature, Jewish history. So that was a terrific important. But not only in Israel. For instance, in Germany, I spoke to many German teachers and state attorneys. The state attorneys, many of them said, we wanted to bring cases against the Nazi criminals, especially in the death camps, but were not given budgets, not given encouragement, so we couldn't do that. There were teachers who said, we wanted to bring this into the schools, but we never managed to do it. The parents who were Nazis, they certainly didn't want the children to know about this. But even the ones who were not Nazis, they did not want the children to come home and ask them, where were you? Why didn't you demonstrate against that? Why didn't you resist that? Why didn't you criticize it? So they preferred not to. But then, during the Eichmann trial, this came into every home for an hour, for months. So no one could resist anymore, those people who wanted to show this. So the teachers brought this development into schools, and the state attorneys brought cases. There was a chain reaction of cases, Auschwitz and Majdanek and Treblinka and Belzec and so people. All this should have happened before, but at least happened afterwards. So now we have, with the German meticulousness, we have judgments of German judges who describe in all detail what happened in those cases there, in those places there. And that's of special importance about fighting those who are trying to deny nowadays that these things happened. This is exaggerated, didn't happen, propaganda, and so on. So against all these deniers, we have now these documents, and also part of the result of the trial. And I must tell you, I'm sometimes regarded as an incorrigible optimist. I see the positive things. And I must tell you, sometimes it surprises me. I mean, it's not only because 50 years now, but 50 years have passed, and the interest in the Eichmann trial grows from year to year all over the world, and especially in Germany. And they've decided in every parliament, in every province, every year to devote a whole day reminding people of the Holocaust, remembering the holidays. And I am invited very often to come there. And not only, and I was invited to the Wannsee, with the 65 years of the Wannsee Conference, etc. And not only that, practically in all the places where I come to, the Germans responsible asked me to come and to meet young people, to meet young pupils in school, 17, 18 years old. I was last year again, I was in Saarbrücken, and they asked me for 400 children were asked to prepare themselves and to come and to talk. And afterwards they go and they are asked to prepare themselves, and they read things, and they go to newspapers afterwards and tell about their feelings. So I must say, when I see that, and now here also I've been coming after I was in Germany, in Frankfurt and in other places, and I see that the majority there, it's not just tactics, it's not just politics. I have the feeling that really they want to, and I hope that all of us will cooperate in that, to see to it that terrible, frightful things like that will never happen again. Thank you very much.